It started with laughter, the kind that fills a ballroom, warm and harmless, until it isn't. Golden light spilled across the mirrored walls of the Beverly Hilton, catching diamonds, champagne, the gloss of 1,000 perfect smiles. It was supposed to be a celebration, a night for Hollywood to honor its legends, toast its newcomers, and pretend that age and ego could share the same table. But beneath the laughter, there was a crackle, the quiet electricity that comes when two eras stare each other down. The host, sharp and polished, played his role with ease. One side of the room grew up with Walker, Texas Ranger, he said into the mic, the other grew up with Creed. The crowd roared, half nostalgia, half bravado. At a front table, Michael B. Jordan leaned back, smiling like a man perfectly aware that all eyes were on him. His tux was crisp, his posture relaxed, but his confidence had a blade's edge. He was Hollywood's new symbol of strength. Young, disciplined, adored. Across the room sat Chuck Norris. No entourage, no stylist hovering nearby. Just a man in a dark suit, his posture straight, his presence oddly grounding amid the glitz. He wasn't a myth to himself. That's what made him dangerous. When the applause died, the host called Michael to the stage. He walked up with an easy swagger, microphone in hand. "You know," he said, smiling into the lights, "we all respect the legends. Without them, none of us would be here." Polite nods. Perfect setup. "But let's be real," he continued. "This isn't the 80s anymore. The game's changed. These days, real fighters do it on screen and in the gym." The laughter that followed wasn't mean, but it wasn't kind either. It had that nervous, uncertain pitch that lives halfway between admiration and disbelief. The cameras found Chuck. He wasn't laughing. His expression was calm, not offended, just focused. The kind of stillness that makes people uncomfortable. Michael, sensing the silence, chuckled again. "Hey, no disrespect, man. Times just evolve." Chuck stood up, slowly, like time itself decided to stretch for him. The room's air seemed to tighten. He walked to the stage, movements unhurried, yet heavy with intention. When he reached Michael, he extended his hand. The handshake was brief, too brief, but the energy behind it rippled through the room. "Maybe so," Chuck said, his voice low but clear. "But the truth never goes out of style." The words hit like a note that shouldn't echo, but does anyway. The crowd froze. Michael smiled, but something in his expression faltered, just for a second. The cameras caught it, immortalized it. Chuck released his hand, nodded once, and returned to his seat without another word. The host stammered through a recovery line about old-school wisdom, but it came out thin. Within moments, the tone of the entire night had shifted. The laughter that followed was lighter, shallower, the kind of sound people make when they don't know who just won. Outside, under the cool Los Angeles night, the buzz began. Someone from Variety whispered, "He really said that." Someone else. It wasn't what he said, it was how he said it. By morning, the clip had hit every feed. Michael B. Jordan tells Chuck Norris, "This isn't the 80s anymore." Millions of views, hundreds of headlines. But none of them captured the part that mattered, the silence that came after. Because in that silence, everyone in the room understood something that couldn't be tweeted or cut into a meme. Michael B. Jordan wasn't just talking to Chuck Norris. He was talking to time. And time had just answered back. "Where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel." By the time the sun rose over Los Angeles, the video had already been viewed 5 million times. Clipped, looped, remixed, the moment had escaped the ballroom and entered legend. This isn't the 80s anymore. The truth never goes out of style. Two lines, two men, two eras colliding in real time. Talk shows feasted on it. The View debated whether Michael B. Jordan was disrespectful or just confident. Sports commentators weighed in, comparing Chuck Norris to aging boxers who refused to quit. Twitter, or X, as the world insisted on calling it now, split in half. The young called it a changing of the guard. The old called it arrogance. And somewhere between those two waves, something deeper was happening. At a downtown coffee shop, an assistant producer from ESPN was scrolling through reactions. One comment caught her eye. "Settle it in the gym. Real versus respect. Old versus new. Norris versus Jordan. Exhibition match for charity." By noon, it wasn't a comment anymore. It was a movement. 3 days later, Variety confirmed it, a one-night-only Generations of Strength charity event. a demonstration sparring match between Michael B. Jordan and Chuck Norris. Officially, it was for veterans programs. Unofficially, everyone knew what it really was, a test of pride dressed as philanthropy. Michael's team celebrated. They called it a friendly exhibition. His publicist smiled through every interview, repeating the same talking point. Michael has the utmost respect for Mr. Norris. This is about honoring martial arts history, not challenging it. But behind the cameras, Michael's tone was different. "I'm not trying to hurt the guy," he told a reporter from Men's Health, smirking. "But let's be honest, slow-motion kicks don't hit the same anymore. We train differently. We fight differently." The quote went viral before he finished the interview. That night, in a dimly lit dojo outside Dallas, Chuck watched the clip on an old laptop. His students, kids mostly, a few veterans, had gathered after class to see his reaction. The room smelled of sweat, cedar, and something older, respect. He didn't speak for a long time. The video ended. Silence. Finally, one of the students asked, "Sir, are you really going to do it?" Chuck nodded once. "It's for charity." Another boy, barely 20, frowned. "But he's trying to make you look weak." Chuck smiled faintly. "You can't make someone look weak if they're not afraid to be tested." The boys looked at each other, unsure if it was wisdom or challenge. Then Chuck stood, tied the sash around his waist, and turned toward the bag. He hit it once, slow, measured, and the sound filled the entire dojo like thunder moving through wood. "Sir," another student asked carefully, "are you stepping into the ring with Creed?" Chuck looked at him, calm and steady. "No," he said. "I'm stepping in with a man who forgot respect." The line wasn't meant for cameras, but one of the students filmed it anyway. By morning, it was everywhere. When reporters reached out, Chuck's spokesperson released a single statement. "Mr. Norris has agreed to participate in the charity exhibition on one condition: no scripts, no choreography, no commentary. Just honesty." The internet erupted again. Michael's fans called it ego. Chuck's fans called it discipline. But deep down, everyone knew. This was no longer about entertainment. This was philosophy in gloves. Training footage surfaced. Michael in a sleek private gym, neon lights, high-tech equipment, a soundtrack of heavy bass. His punches looked cinematic, precise, fast. Every motion engineered for the camera. Chuck, in contrast, barefoot on hardwood floors, punching air in silence. No music, just breath, focus, stillness. The kind of training that didn't need witnesses. Reporters tried to get quotes. He ignored them. The only time he spoke was when an old journalist from Black Belt magazine caught him outside the dojo and asked why he agreed to something that could ruin his reputation if it went wrong. Chuck paused, then said simply, "Reputation's what people think of you. Respect's what you earn when no one's watching." The journalist printed it as the headline. Meanwhile, Michael was doing a press run with energy drinks and clothing brands, talking about bridging generations and keeping martial arts relevant. But every time he spoke, his tone carried something performative, a faint hint of someone trying to convince himself he was right. His coach noticed it too. "You sure this is just for show?" he asked after one session. Michael smirked, throwing another punch into the bag. "Man, he's pushing 80. It's not going to be a fight. It's going to be history." The coach didn't answer. He just kept the pads up. Days turned into countdowns. The event sold out in hours. Tickets resold online for thousands. ESPN picked up broadcasting rights. Netflix confirmed they'd film it as part of a documentary series titled Legacy. No one called it a demonstration anymore. In Texas, the dojo windows glowed faintly under the evening sun. Chuck practiced alone after hours. The mirrors reflected a man moving slowly, perfectly, a rhythm older than fame itself. He wasn't training for victory. He was training for peace. But when he stopped and wiped the sweat from his hands, a small smile crossed his face, the kind that comes before a storm. Because deep down, he knew something the rest of the world had forgotten. When truth steps into the ring, time doesn't care how young you are. The arena lights hummed like electricity, waiting to be unleashed. It wasn't a fight night, not officially, just a charity exhibition, as every sponsor poster proudly declared. But the crowd that filled the Los Angeles Sports Center didn't look like people who'd come for charity. They looked like witnesses waiting for a verdict. Cameras lined the ring from every angle. Reporters murmured into their microphones. Influencers streamed live, tagging every breath with hashtags. Hashtag Norris versus Jordan. Hashtag old school versus new. The air smelled of metal and sweat. Somewhere, a fog machine hissed for effect. Michael B. Jordan entered first. The crowd roared. He looked like a headline in motion, sculpted, young, glowing under the lights. His walk carried rhythm. His hoodie bore the logo of his latest sponsor, and a Netflix camera hovered inches from his shoulder, capturing every step for the Legacy documentary. He moved like a man who believed in his own myth. Then the lights dimmed. No music, no grand entrance, just silence and the sound of slow footsteps. Chuck Norris appeared at the far end of the tunnel. No gloves, no robe, no entourage. Black GI barefoot, the same kind he'd worn for 50 years. The crowd's roar didn't know what to do with itself. Some cheered out of respect, others out of confusion, a few just stared. He walked toward the ring like it was a place he'd been to many times before, not for fame, not for cameras, but for something older, simpler. Michael looked across the ring and grinned. Didn't expect the retro look. Chuck stepped between the ropes, eyes steady. Didn't expect the costumes. The referee, a retired UFC fighter, called them both to the center. "Gentlemen," he began, "this is an exhibition. No full contact, no." But neither man was listening. Michael kept his gaze locked on Chuck, his jaw tight, but smiling. "Don't take it personal, old man." Chuck's voice was even. "It's never personal. It's about truth." The bell rang. The first minute was all theater. Michael bounced on his toes, light, fast, throwing jabs that looked cinematic. Wide arcs, snapping combinations, all flash. The crowd cheered every move. The cameras zoomed in, hungry for a moment to crown the new king. Chuck barely moved. He stood with the stillness of a man who didn't need to prove motion. His eyes followed, measuring, memorizing, waiting for the noise to reveal a pattern. Michael's punches sliced air, never skin. Chuck's body shifted just enough, his feet whispering against the mat. It went on for 20 seconds, 30, and then something changed. Chuck stepped forward once. A small step, barely visible, but the air in the room shifted. Michael threw a hook, fast, precise, and found nothing. In that same breath, Chuck's right hand moved, clean and quiet. Not a hard hit, just perfectly placed. The sound wasn't loud, more like a tap on a drum, but the effect was instant. Michael froze, eyes wide. His balance faltered, knees dipped, the lights blurred. He didn't fall dramatically. He just folded. The referee caught him before he hit the mat. For a second, nobody understood what had happened. The crowd went silent, tens of thousands of people holding a collective breath. Then, the whispers started. Was that real? What did he do? Is he okay? Michael blinked, trying to gather himself. Chuck knelt beside him, calm, patient, as if they were still in training. He didn't raise his hands or smile for the cameras. He simply offered his arm. Michael took it, unsteady, embarrassed, angry, though he didn't know at whom. Chuck leaned closer and said, low enough that only he could hear, "Don't mistake movement for control." Then he stood and walked to his corner. The referee tried to restart the match, but the sponsors were already panicking. The director from Netflix gestured frantically. Was that the ending? The commentators fumbled for words. The crowd erupted, half cheering, half confused. No one could agree on what they'd just witnessed. In the press box, a journalist muttered, "That wasn't power. That was timing." On social media, the replay hit within minutes. Frame by frame, comment sections turned into digital riots. "He didn't even hit him hard. Bro fainted from aura. That's called real martial arts. Nah, that's just old man luck." Meanwhile, down in the ring, Michael sat on the stool, head in his hands. His coach whispered something, but he didn't respond. The taste of metal filled his mouth. The sound of the crowd felt far away. Chuck walked over again. The cameras tried to get closer, but he waved them off. He crouched beside Michael, placed a hand on his shoulder, and said quietly, "Experience isn't age. It's the time you spend learning what not to chase." Michael looked up at him, confused, half humiliated, half searching for meaning. Chuck didn't wait for a reply. He bowed slightly to the referee, then to the crowd, and stepped out of the ring. No victory lap. No cameras. Just silence. The headlines were written before he reached the parking lot. Chuck Norris drops Michael B. Jordan in 10 seconds. By midnight, the clip had hit every platform. Hashtag Truth Never Ages trended globally. And somewhere in the noise, beneath all the laughter, edits, and opinions, a quiet understanding began to spread. He hadn't come to win. He'd come to remind them. The bell rang. The crowd exploded, flashes firing like lightning. Every camera in the arena turned toward the ring, expecting choreography, spectacle, a carefully staged lesson in legacy. Michael B. Jordan smiled, loose, confident. He rolled his shoulders, threw a few light jabs. Crisp, fast, picture perfect. The kind of punches that look good on film. He was relaxed, playing to the crowd, feeding off their noise. Across from him, Chuck Norris didn't move. He stood with that strange stillness that comes from decades of repetition, the kind of stillness that isn't passive but coiled, alive. His eyes didn't follow the gloves. They watched breath, posture, weight. Michael circled, grinning. You ready, old man? No reply. The first jab snapped forward, sharp, practiced. It hit nothing. The second came faster, followed by a quick right hook, textbook clean. Still nothing. Chuck stepped aside, not dodging, just absent where the punch used to be. The crowd laughed nervously. To them, it looked like choreography. But the silence from Chuck made it feel wrong. Too real, too deliberate. Michael adjusted, eyes narrowing. He fired another combination, 3 strikes, then a feint. Again, Chuck didn't block. He just turned, redirecting the air between them. His movements were small, quiet, surgical. Then it happened. 1 second, Michael was attacking. The next, Chuck's body shifted. A slight pivot, left foot forward, hip twist, and a short circular strike to the ribs. It wasn't hard. It wasn't even loud. But Michael froze. His body stiffened as if something had short-circuited. His breath vanished. He stepped back, blinking, his lungs refusing to expand for a heartbeat too long. The crowd went silent. Cameras missed it. Even the referee looked confused. Then came the noise, the delayed reaction of disbelief. Murmurs. Gasps. Someone shouted. What just happened? Chuck took half a step forward, calm as a metronome. Son, he said quietly, it's not about when you were born. It's about how you were built. The microphone on the referee's chest picked it up. The words echoed through the speakers, bouncing off the walls like something ancient and cold. Michael tried to laugh. He managed half of one, but sweat had already formed at his temples. His breathing changed. The audience saw it, the confidence cracking, replaced by something unfamiliar. For the first time all night, he wasn't performing. He was processing. He raised his gloves again, nodding as if to say, okay, you got me. The crowd cheered, mistaking the gesture for showmanship. But his eyes told another story, wide, alert, uncertain. Chuck stayed still, the embodiment of control. No taunting, no flourish, no ego. Just discipline, pure, quiet, and terrifying in its simplicity. Michael lunged forward again, faster this time. His punches came tighter, angrier, his breathing louder. He hit the air where Chuck used to be, again and again, the sound of his gloves slapping emptiness. Chuck shifted his weight, barely noticeable. His stance never broke. Every move was economy, a lifetime of muscle memory refined to silence. And then another small twist, another counter. Not to hurt, to teach. Michael staggered again. He didn't fall, didn't crumble, but the energy drained from his posture. His arms lowered just an inch too much. The crowd sound dipped to a murmur, that strange, reverent quiet that happens when thousands of people realize they're watching something they can't explain. A man in the front row whispered, he's not fighting him. He's reading him. Michael stepped back, breathing hard, nodding again. His lips moved, but no sound came out. He was trying to make it look casual, but the tremor in his gloves betrayed him. Across the ring, Chuck exhaled slowly, never breaking eye contact. His expression wasn't smug or proud. It was kind, like a teacher who knows his student finally understands the lesson, even if he hates learning it. The bell rang again, mercy from the timekeeper. The crowd erupted into applause, not sure what they'd just seen, but certain it mattered. Michael turned toward his corner, hands on his knees, chest heaving. His coach leaned in, whispering, you good? He nodded quickly. Too quickly. Yeah, he's fast, man. But his hands were shaking. Behind him, Chuck stood where he was, not even walking to his corner. He didn't need the rest. He wasn't chasing victory. He was measuring time. From the stands, someone shouted, come on, Creed. Show him what you got. Michael forced a grin, raised a glove, waved to the crowd, the performer instinct still alive. But as he turned back, his face hardened. The playfulness was gone. Because deep down, beneath the adrenaline and pride, he understood something simple and cold. This wasn't choreography. It wasn't a performance or a PR stunt. He was no longer the star of a story. He was a student inside a truth. And that truth was older, quieter, and far less forgiving than anything Hollywood could stage. For the first time in his career, Michael B. Jordan wasn't performing. He was surviving. The 1-minute break felt longer than any round. Michael sat in his corner, breathing through clenched teeth, trying to make the air sound calm. Sweat rolled down his face in thin streaks, stinging his eyes. His coach pressed a cold towel against his neck. "You good?" the coach asked. Michael nodded too fast. "Yeah, he's quick. Didn't expect that." "You expected a movie," the coach said. "He's not in one." Across the ring, Chuck didn't move. No stool, no rest. He stood still in the center, hands folded in front of him, eyes unfocused but alert. The crowd began chanting his name, a low, rhythmic sound that filled the air like thunder before rain. He didn't react. He wasn't performing. He was waiting. Michael watched him and tried to smirk, but the muscles in his jaw betrayed the effort. His gloves trembled just enough for the camera to catch it. "You trying to embarrass me out here, huh?" he said, not loud enough for the mic, just enough to sound like control. Chuck's reply cut through the distance between them. "No, I'm trying to remind you who you are." The bell. Round 2. Michael stepped forward first, faster now, sharper, no more testing. He threw a double jab, a cross, a low kick, weaving boxing with Muay Thai, a hybrid rhythm he knew better than most. The crowd roared. This was what they came for. The storm, the flash, the soundtrack of impact. Chuck barely shifted. His defense wasn't defensive, it was absence. Every attack met air. His feet slid an inch at a time, his hands never fully lifted. It was as if the space itself moved to protect him. Michael growled through his teeth, frustration bleeding into power. He faked a left hook, then turned it into a spinning strike meant to shock him, the kind that always looked good on film. But Chuck didn't flinch. He stepped in instead of back. A quiet slip inside the arc, a forearm redirect, a small turn of the hip, and suddenly, Michael's center of gravity vanished. A light sweep, simple, exact, mercilessly efficient. Michael hit the canvas before he knew he was falling. No pain, just the shock of being out of rhythm with reality. The crowd gasped, that collective sound of disbelief before applause. A cameraman muttered, "Holy hell, that was clean." Michael blinked, stared up at the ceiling lights, then at the man standing calmly above him. Chuck didn't move closer, didn't celebrate. He just waited, hand extended, palm open. Michael's pride held him still. His breath shook. Then he pushed himself up, ignoring the offer. "I'm not done yet," he said. "I didn't say you were," Chuck replied. The crowd loved it, not as drama, but as honesty. For the first time, the fight felt real. Michael circled again, his movements tighter, more deliberate. The flashy patterns were gone. Now it was muscle and intent. He jabbed short, stepped smart, watching for small cues. He wasn't chasing the knockout. He was studying the silence between each move. Chuck nodded once, almost imperceptibly. Michael's coach leaned over the ropes, whispering, "Now you're fighting." Michael didn't answer. He didn't need to. He closed distance again. 1-2, shoulder roll, low feint. But this time, he didn't overcommit. The rhythm had changed. The audience sensed it too. The roar faded into focused quiet. Chuck met him mid-motion, redirected another strike with minimal force, then tapped his glove against Michael's chest. A gesture, not a hit. "Better," he said softly. It wasn't an insult. It was approval. Michael exhaled, steady, no smirk this time. He reset, mirrored the stance, mirrored the calm. The round stretched into something different, less spectacle, more conversation. Fist to fist, thought to thought. Two men not fighting for dominance, but for understanding. The bell snapped through the air. Michael backed into his corner, slower now. He didn't throw his arms up, didn't look for cameras. His coach handed him water, but he didn't take it. He just stared at the man across from him, standing motionless once again, head slightly bowed. The crowd had stopped chanting. They were watching in silence, realizing they were witnessing something they hadn't come for, something better. A different kind of respect began to ripple through the noise. Michael's coach leaned close. "You feel it?" Michael nodded. "Yeah." "What is it?" He looked up at Chuck, then at his own gloves, and said quietly, "Balance." The bell for the next round was seconds away. Chuck's gaze lifted. For the first time that night, he smiled, just barely, and something in Michael shifted. The defensiveness fell away. The pride softened into purpose. He wasn't fighting an icon anymore. He was standing across from a mirror. That's when it stopped being about fame and started being about respect. By the time the third round began, the crowd had forgotten to shout. The arena, once a hurricane of noise, had gone still, thousands of people watching, but no one daring to breathe too loud. The lights above the ring hummed softly, tracing halos over sweat-slick shoulders. The air was heavy with focus. Michael B. Jordan stood in his corner, breathing deep. The adrenaline had burned off. His body was slower now, not weak, just deliberate. Every muscle seemed to move with new intention. Across from him, Chuck Norris was unchanged. Calm, unhurried. His chest rose and fell like a tide. The bell rang. They met at center. No flurry, no rush, just quiet steps, the sound of bare feet sliding across canvas. Michael moved first, faintly circling, studying angles. He wasn't chasing victory anymore. He was searching for understanding. His jab came clean, no theatrics, no wasted motion. Chuck parried with almost invisible precision, a redirection rather than a block. Their rhythm found a strange harmony. Two fighters, two eras, moving inside the same truth. Somewhere in the third row, a producer whispered, "Why aren't they hitting each other?" A retired boxer beside him said, "They are. Just not where you can see it." Michael feinted right, then turned a short hook, not to land, but to test. Chuck responded with a step offline, his body moving like wind slipping past a tree. Michael grinned. "You don't slow down, do you?" Chuck smiled, the faintest curve of calm lips. "Only when I stop caring." The words hung between them like smoke. Michael nodded once. Then he attacked. For real. A quick 1-2 to the body, pivot, head shot, fluid, sharp, grounded in everything he'd learned since the first punch he ever threw. Chuck took it all in, not resisting, not avoiding, absorbing the rhythm. When he finally countered, it was with something so small it barely had a shape. A wrist shift, a turn of balance, a sweep that wasn't meant to throw but to remind. Michael stumbled forward, caught himself, reset. His breath came steady. He smiled again, not the cocky grin of the movie star, but the raw, exhausted one of a man who'd finally stopped pretending. They circled again. Time seemed to stretch. The crowd didn't see fighters anymore. They saw philosophy. The stillness before each move felt sacred. Cameras zoomed in, capturing beads of sweat, the twitch of muscle, the faint tremor in Chuck's hands that didn't matter anymore. Michael threw another strike, sharper, faster, but this time Chuck didn't counter. He caught it mid-motion, twisted, and redirected it downward, guiding Michael to the mat with something closer to grace than power. A textbook throw, perfect balance, perfect restraint. But he didn't finish it. Instead, he knelt beside him, hand resting gently on Michael's shoulder. "Now you see the difference." The crowd erupted, not with cheers, but with something deeper, like reverence. Applause started as a murmur, then rose into a wave that filled the arena. Even the lights seemed to pulse with it. Michael stayed on one knee, breathing hard, looking up at the man who'd just beaten him without trying to win. There was no shame in his eyes now, only respect. Chuck extended his hand. This time Michael took it. He stood, head bowed slightly, and without waiting for a cue, raised Chuck's arm high for the cameras. The crowd responded with a roar that shook the rafters. No one saw a loser in that moment. Only two men, one teaching, one learning, both unchanged by victory, both defined by how they carried it. Reporters shouted for statements, but neither spoke. Chuck bowed once to the crowd. Michael mirrored the motion, still catching his breath. The cameras caught it. The symmetry, the silence, the strange peace that followed impact. Somewhere backstage, a director muttered, "You can't write that." And he was right. As they stepped down from the ring, the sound of applause followed them like a tide retreating to shore. Michael turned as they neared the tunnel, still half in the glow of the lights. "You didn't have to go easy on me," he said quietly. Chuck looked at him, the ghost of a smile in his eyes. "I didn't." They shared a laugh, Small, tired, real. The kind that closes a distance words can't. Back in the locker room, the noise of the arena dimmed to a hum. Michael sat on the bench, gloves still on, staring at his reflection in the cracked mirror opposite him. His face looked older, maybe wiser. He couldn't tell which mattered more. He whispered to himself, "That wasn't a fight." And from somewhere down the hall came the low, grounded reply, as if Chuck had heard him anyway. "No, that was balance." Outside, the crowd began to thin. The last of the cheers dissolved into conversation, laughter, the buzz of a night that had turned into legend. But for those who'd been there, for the ones who'd seen it up close, the silence that lingered afterward said everything words couldn't. Because every punch that hadn't landed, every pause between movements, every respectful nod carried more weight than any knockout ever could. And in that silence, every young fighter in the room realized the 80s never left. They just grew wiser. The sound didn't fade when the bell did. It lingered, like thunder refusing to leave the sky. People were on their feet, clapping, shouting, recording. The lights above the ring turned everything into gold and smoke. But in the middle of it, two men just stood, still, breathing heavy, eyes locked. No words, no smiles. Then, slowly, Michael B. Jordan walked forward. No swagger, no smirk, just a quiet kind of honesty. He extended his glove. Chuck met it halfway. The handshake was short, but something passed between them. Not victory, not defeat, something older. The cameras caught it perfectly. The crowd erupted again, this time softer, warmer. The noise lost its edge. It sounded like gratitude. When they left the ring, they didn't stop for interviews. Michael walked first, jaw tight, eyes clear. Chuck followed, calm as stone, already halfway gone from the noise. By morning, the moment was everywhere. Norris schools Jordan. The old lion still roars. Respect the legend. Clips flooded every feed. TikTok loops, slowed replays, captions that said, "Watch his face when Chuck moves." Some called it a masterclass. Others said it was cruel. Hashtag split the internet in half. Hashtag respect the legend versus hashtag new blood rising. Talk shows replayed the handshake on repeat. A host said, "That wasn't a fight. That was a sermon." Another replied, "Or a reminder that humility still hurts." But underneath the noise, something deeper was shifting. People weren't laughing anymore. Michael gave one short interview that changed the tone completely. Standing outside a studio, he said quietly, "That man didn't just beat me. He taught me something no director ever could." The clip went viral, not because it was flashy, but because it was true. Even those who hadn't seen the fight understood the tone in his voice. It wasn't humiliation. It was awakening. From that moment, the story stopped being about winning or losing. It became about how a person carries defeat and what kind of man doesn't need to gloat when he wins. Older fans called it the best thing that's happened to Hollywood in years. Younger ones said, "Didn't expect to feel this much respect for a guy my dad watched." Meanwhile, Chuck stayed invisible. No statements, no posts. His publicist tried to reach him, nothing. Producers wanted to turn it into a documentary. Sponsors offered deals. Streaming giants wanted exclusives. He declined all of it. Quietly, a single message went out from his assistant. "He's home. He's fine." That was it. In Texas, morning sun hit the open doors of a small dojo. Inside, the floor smelled of pine oil and dust. Chuck swept it himself, same as always. When his students arrived, he corrected stances, adjusted elbows, and said nothing about Los Angeles. A teenage boy asked, "Did you really fight that movie guy?" Chuck looked up and smiled. "We practice truth," he said. "Sometimes, that looks like fighting." The boy nodded, though he didn't fully understand. Few did. Reporters found the town within days. Cameras parked outside the dojo, waiting for a quote. None came. A handwritten sign hung on the door. "Class in session." No cameras. The silence became part of the legend. People started to quote it online. The man said nothing. That's how you know he meant everything. Michael, meanwhile, kept training. No entourage, no posts, no jokes. Something in him had shifted. He wasn't rehearsing anymore. He was rebuilding. In an interview weeks later, when asked about a rematch, he shook his head. "There's nothing to rematch. Some lessons you only need once." It didn't trend, but it stayed. Commentators argued on panels. Was Chuck too hard on him? Others replied, He gave him exactly what he needed. The truth was simpler. It wasn't about dominance. It was about inheritance, the moment when one generation stops pretending it knows everything and starts to listen. Back in Los Angeles, the arena staff rolled up the mats, swept the confetti, shut off the lights. The air still carried that strange charge, like the echo of something that mattered. People would go on arguing about who won, who lost, what it meant. But everyone who had been there, everyone who'd seen that silent handshake, knew what it really was. It wasn't a fight. It was a conversation. And while the world talked, dissected, praised, and mocked, one thing stayed constant. Chuck Norris didn't say a word. Because truth doesn't need an audience. Weeks passed. The headlines dimmed. The internet found new things to argue about. But for Michael, the noise didn't fade. It just moved inward. He was back on set, filming a new project. Lights, cues, choreography. The routine should have felt familiar, comforting even. But it didn't. Something in him had changed. His movements were slower, cleaner, almost too precise. Between takes, he'd stand still for long stretches, hands on his knees, thinking. The director called it method focus. It wasn't. It was silence working its way through him. At night, in his trailer, he'd replay the fight, not the hits, but the moments between them. The pause before Chuck moved. The calm in his eyes. The way the crowd vanished into air when truth filled the space. He couldn't explain it, but it haunted him. Not like shame, more like an unfinished lesson. One night, around midnight, he scrolled through his contacts until he saw a number he'd saved and never used. Just Chuck, Texas. His thumb hovered over the screen for a long minute before he hit call. It rang twice. Hello. The voice was steady, not surprised. Hey, Mr. Norris. It's Michael. A pause. Then, evening, son. Michael laughed softly. Yeah, guess it's late. I'm old, Chuck said. I wake up early anyway. Another pause. The kind where neither man knows if it's time to talk or to listen. I've been thinking about that day, Michael finally said. About the fight. I figured you might. He stopped, choosing words carefully. You didn't humiliate me. You humbled me. There was a faint sound on the other end, like a slow exhale, maybe even a smile. That's how strength starts, Chuck said. When ego ends. Michael let the silence sit. It wasn't awkward. It was grounding. I used to think respect was something you could earn by being louder, he said. Now I think it's about being still. Chuck's tone softened. Stillness isn't weakness. It's control. Most people never find it because they're too busy trying to prove they already have it. Michael nodded, even though no one could see it. I get that now. I know, Chuck replied. That's why you called. For a while, neither spoke. The line hummed quietly. The world outside the trailer was sleeping, traffic gone, wind brushing faintly against the metal walls. Then Michael said, almost shyly, I'm working on something new. A film. But it's different. It's not about fighting. It's about what comes after. After what? Chuck asked. After pride. After the spotlight. After the noise. Chuck said nothing, but the silence encouraged him to continue. I want to do it right, Michael said. And I can't think of anyone better to show what that looks like. You're asking me to fight again? Michael smiled. No, sir. I'm asking you to teach. There was a soft creak, like a chair leaning back on the other end of the line. Chuck was thinking. You want a legend to play a mentor, he said. No, Michael replied. I want a man to play himself. Someone who doesn't need to prove anything to be heard. Chuck chuckled quietly. You sure your producers are ready for that kind of story? They will be, Michael said. It's not about generations anymore. It's about respect. About showing what it looks like when two eras stop competing and start learning from each other. The silence stretched again. This one was longer, but not empty. Finally, Chuck said, send me the script. Michael's breath left him in a laugh, small, genuine, relieved. You mean that? If it's worth saying, Chuck answered, I'll help you say it. The call didn't end quickly. They talked a little more, not about contracts or scenes, but about discipline, about how truth moves slower than fame but lasts longer. When the line finally went quiet, it wasn't with goodbye. It was with mutual understanding. Michael sat there for a long time, phone still in his hand, screen black. Outside, the sky was starting to lighten, a faint silver before dawn. He leaned back, closed his eyes, and smiled. For the first time since the fight, he didn't feel like he was chasing something. He felt aligned. Somewhere in Texas, a phone rested on a table beside a half-empty mug. Chuck looked out across his darkened yard, the first birds stirring in the trees, and allowed himself a quiet grin. Two eras, once divided by pride, now connected by purpose. For the first time, they weren't fighting anymore. They were shaking hands. Months later, the world met them again, not in a ring, but on a screen. The premiere took place in an old theater downtown, the kind with velvet seats and walls that remembered applause. The lights dimmed, the chatter faded, and the film began. On screen, Chuck played a retired fighter teaching a young man who'd lost his discipline. Michael played that man, raw, uncertain, searching. The story wasn't about glory. It was about the quiet work of rebuilding yourself after pride cracks. Every movement, every pause carried weight. The training scenes felt real because they were. No stunt doubles, no choreography. Just rhythm, breath, and truth. When Chuck's character told the young fighter, "The hardest thing you'll ever fight is your reflection," the theater went silent. It wasn't dialogue. It was confession. When the credits rolled, no one clapped at first. Then they did, slow, rising, like an exhale that had waited months to release. The film became a hit, but that wasn't the story. The story was what it meant. Critics called it the rare movie that remembers what strength feels like. Fans wrote that it made them want to stand up straighter. A sports magazine ran the headline, "Norris and Jordan, two men, one lesson." But the most powerful moment came after the premiere, off camera. The lights came on. People stood, talking in low voices. Michael turned to Chuck, who was already standing to leave, hat in hand, simple as ever. "You know," Michael said, "I used to think respect was something you earned once. Like a trophy. Turns out, it's something you earn every day." Chuck looked at him, that same steady gaze that had once made him freeze in a ring full of cameras. "And lost in a second," he said, "if you forget where you came from." Michael smiled. "Guess I had to get knocked down to understand that." Chuck nodded. "We all do." They started walking toward the exit, their reflections trailing beside them in the polished floor, two silhouettes moving through the last light of the theater. The sound of the audience behind them faded into a hum. Outside, night waited. Cool air, a faint breeze carrying the buzz of the city. People called their names from across the street. Michael waved once, quick and humble. Chuck just raised a hand, a quiet gesture that said enough. For a moment, they stood there, side by side, watching the lights flicker against the glass doors. Michael said softly, "You ever miss the noise?" Chuck's answer came without hesitation. "Only when I forget why I left it." They both laughed, low and easy. A few photographers snapped pictures, but neither posed. They just kept walking down the street, an old man and a younger one, shoulders even, steps unhurried. Behind them, the theater marquee still glowed. The Way of Respect, a film by Michael B. Jordan, starring Chuck Norris. The glow reflected in puddles along the sidewalk, stretching the letters into soft, golden ripples. Somewhere a car honked. Someone shouted goodnight. The world went on. And yet, something in that moment felt final, like the ending of a story that had been waiting to close for decades. Neither of them needed to say it, but they both knew. They hadn't just made a movie. They had passed something on. Weeks later, during a late-night interview, Michael was asked what he'd learned from working with Chuck. He thought for a long time before answering. "When I said, 'This isn't the 80s anymore,' I was wrong," he said finally. The 80s weren't about style. They were about soul. About showing up when no one's watching. About respect that doesn't need to be filmed. The interviewer smiled. "You sound like him." Michael laughed. "That's the point." In Texas, Chuck didn't watch the interview. He didn't need to. He was at the dojo, same as always, sweeping the floor, correcting stances, starting over. He believed legacy wasn't what you leave behind. It was what you keep doing until you can't anymore. The younger students asked if he'd seen the movie. "I lived it," he said simply, tightening a belt around his waist. He looked up at a framed photo on the wall, a much younger man in a GI, eyes focused, hands folded. For a moment, time folded with it. Then he smiled. The door creaked open. Morning light spilled in. A new class was waiting. He motioned them inside. "Let's begin." And so it did, again. Because legends don't fade. They evolve. One fight. One lesson. One generation at a time.